Talk Satellite and Comms Day convened this one-day forum, a true gathering of world and domestic satellite leaders. The aim to identify and initiate needed dialogue for the development of satellites as a primary delivery mechanism for universal service purposes. The Australasia Satellite Forum is a uniquely inclusive platform to address issues of urgent concern to governments, enterprise and consumer entities.
Ka-band was really the only option to provide broadband to a sufficient number of customers reliably, stable platform. Bringing it together into the whole NBN, I think, provides an opportunity, I think, for the satellite industry, if they adequately communicate where they fit into the jigsaw, to really take a leap forward. It allows 100% coverage. No question, it provides the bandwidth and the cost per megabyte compared to KU band. We're now at the stage of maturation where the customer equipment really makes it viable, whereas 5 years ago that wasn't the case.
We are intending to launch 2 Ka-band satellites to provide coverage for approximately 3% of the Australian population that is not able to be economically reached by either fibre or wireless delivery. I guess the fundamental one that has driven all of NBN is the open access and uniform national pricing policies, and so the government, as you're probably aware, has been fairly vocal in terms of these policies, providing open access for end users as well as access seekers, and to deliver those services at a threshold level across all access technologies, whether they happen to be wireless or fibre, at a standard price, and that price has been set at $24 for the access virtual circuit, irrespective of the access technology. So the principle there has been, I guess, in terms of open access and uniform national pricing, is to provide a uniform price and product structure across the industry to enable as rapid take-up of services as possible, and ones which are cost affordable for the end user.
From your points of view as satellite operators serving the Australian and other markets, currently, how much of your leasing today, and I think the answer is going to be generally pretty small, but how much you're leasing today, it was directly impacted by NBN? What would it take away from you today?
We provide through either direct or through some wholesale partners. We address some of the ABG business. It's a small but important complementary part of our business that would be directly affected. But again, it's a small part of our business.
In the case of Newsat, we don't address any of the AGB components, but our concern would simply be that the 2 satellites don't start to encroach on the business that we have been nurturing for a long time.
But the concern is, well, what happens if there's creep? What happens if they start beginning to look into other applications?
When we're making decisions about where we put new satellites and put new beams, we look at things like, is the government going to play in our sector? And we're building out our Asian arc at the moment. We're adding more satellites, and we have to make decisions about, do we invest in this country and put beams here to provide services for people, or do we decide not to? And I think it would, if NBN Co and the government would clarify the point on which, and perhaps contain the scope creep, it would make it a lot easier for us to invest in this country and provide services here.
I can see with Ka-band and the throughput capability and the low cost per megabit that we could see some sort of mobility solution being created for Australia, for caravans, for boating, for land mobility coming out of this. So that's an area I don't think that the traditional FSS industry works upon, so it's not really an encroachment. It's a new application which develops more use of satellite capacity, which I see a positive thing. I'd reinforce what Glenn has said. This is Ka-band beams. It's not suited, we think, to the broadcast environment. But we also see traditional fixed satellite services businesses growing. I think what we see with high throughput satellites and Ka-band satellites is different levels of service availability. You've got parts of Australia that suffer from very high rain issues, so we'd look to see traditional C-band, KU-band services still being available and growing in those areas to provide the service availability that is needed.
If the Australian taxpayers are subsidising and funding these satellites, what the Australian taxpayers don't want to do is to, for example, subsidise the oil, gas and mining companies who are domiciled offshore into cheaper products in Australia. That's not the intention of that. And so if that actually happens, then I guess people like us will jump up and down about it, and it will be as plain as the nose on your face that that is not the intention for Australian taxpayers' money. Our taxpayers' money is to help the disadvantaged, and we love doing that.
Malcolm Turnbull was saying below, the biggest barrier to access to broadband was actually the income of a person. So you'll find in the demographic, the people who don't subscribe to broadband are people who are below the average income. So I think I'd agree with Adrian there in that the subsidy, if it's being used by corporates and others, isn't really where the intention is, and how. I suppose the big question is NBN is what is the take-up going to be of the access that's put out there, and I think no one knows the answer to that.
If you could just speak a few words about your view on developments in the maritime market, CKU services, and how you think the Global Express is going to play into this.
I believe Global Express will take its place in a niche, and that niche is probably the comms on the move element, whether it's unmanned aircraft or unmanned trains, whatever it is, that element in the market. I think that's what the Global Express at this moment in time is probably suited for. Is it going to clash with the VSAT? No, I don't believe so. I think C and KU services in the maritime, they're here to stay, they're here to grow. The forecast and the projections are all saying, you know, depends whose report you read, how many 100% it is over the next 2-3 years. But it's fairly steep growth curve. So I think that C and KU is here to stay.
There is a consensus that VSAT is a way forward. So that's a good base to grow from. We've seen the growth on the KU band driven in the past 2 years mostly by oil and gas related vessels, oil tankers, LNG carriers, supply vessels, survey vessels. And now we're seeing the shipping industry getting into the game as the economy has rebounded a bit.
Your customers, how important is it to listen to the customer now? And what are your customers' key issues at the moment?
Depending on the customer, it's more and more up the value chain. So satellite's just becoming part of an overall solution. That's what we're finding.
Predominantly our clients are driven by the quality of the service and the value add. And because we're consciously looking at that high end of the market, price is always an issue, but really ultimately it's about the quality of the service.
But naturally my customers, satellite operators, only price, right?
Initially when a customer comes to you, he comes thinking that VSAT's not good for him, his applications may not work, it's going to be expensive to roll out the network. But eventually, one really has to work hard with the customer.
Yeah, with cloud, I think we just see ourselves as the connectivity part of that. Even though I've been talking value add at this stage, we're just providing the connectivity.
The impact of cloud computing for us is that effectively where we are in the marketplace is that we're providing managed corporate networks. And those managed corporate networks are a component of larger, more extensive networks. So if you have a very big client that has a national and international network, we're actually a managed component of that.
Satellites really are this critical communications device or capability when we get to a disaster. Often terrestrial communications has been wiped out. We saw that in Japan, we saw that in New Zealand. We've seen satellite come to the fore as a recovery mechanism, and there's several phases you go through when you get into a recovery situation.
From our perspective, we always get a little bit frustrated that everybody has to wait for a disaster and then the telecommunications companies have to
kind of stump up all the infrastructure and the bandwidth to operate through that actual disaster.
Just thought I'd show an accelerated view of disasters in earthquakes, maybe just one type of disaster, earthquakes, across the span of 5 years from 2005 to 2008. So you're watching that as it basically was tracked for 5 years. In total, 37,000 earthquakes across 5 years.
Now, some of the questions that need to be asked on the ground is, what is the state of essential facilities, fire, police, hospitals, etc.? What is the state of critical infrastructure, the roads, power lines? And how extent is the area affected?
Satellite is important for us. So in remote and rural Australia, we use our B3 satellite with tracking antennas to support our 3G network instead of paying close to $1 million a year for the leases in those particular areas. And we actually use that satellite during the floods in Queensland to actually get our 3G network back up and running.
I'm going to talk about a couple of different satellites. So we've been talking all day about satellites, and that really means only one thing in the context and that of today, and that's geostationary communication satellites. But I'm going to introduce another kind of satellite as part of this discussion, and that's called a Earth observation satellite. Earth observation satellites fly in what we call a polar orbit, or perpendicular to that plane. The constellation of Cosmos SkyMed is 4 satellites in the same plane. What that gives you is a good revisit over the area of interest, a high system response, meaning you get a much better availability than you would with 1, 2, or a smaller number of satellite systems. Unlike geostationary satellites that are always visible to a particular area on the Earth, LEO satellites are constantly going over and exiting it, and in some cases only spending something like 10 minutes over the area of interest.
And with that, we close the 2011 Australasia Satellite Forum.